Hey guys, Luke here from Pocket Percussion. I just thought I'd tune in today and talk about nostalgia and just have a random discussion. I haven't done that on the channel for a while, so please feel free to leave your comments below. And I think this is a really valid discussion about, nostalgia in popular culture now, like fashion, TV shows, music. I see with a lot of younger models these days, that 90s kind of like fashion that I cringed at when I was a kid, that I used to wear, is all coming back into rage. Am I just sounding like an old person now? I don't know. But I think it's cool that a lot of my students, like at 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, are kind of getting into the music that I grew up on when it was being released. I was always, as a teenager, obsessed with like music from the 60s and like the Beatles and stuff like that, but still had a lot of music that I grew up on that I've probably taken for granted, especially around the time of when I was in my early 20s, starting out my career as a drummer, and that was around the early 2000s. And one album that I've just pulled out from my collection today, around that time, is Gavin DeGraw, Chariot. This is a super underrated record, even though it had a lot of #1 hits on it, and Gavin kind of wrote most of the songs on this. It's nostalgic because it's had a re-release on vinyl for the first time. It only ever came out on CD, I think. I just looked it up on Discogs. It's like, this is sold out already. I think it's sold out pretty quickly with a limited release, and it's worth like hundreds of dollars just for this record. This was released on clear vinyl. It sounds good on record, but I personally think it sounds better on CD, and CD I'd like to chat about today, because a lot of my students, younger students now, are going back to the CD medium. I'm so glad I held on to my CDs. Like I've just pulled out this morning like boxes and boxes of CDs, and I've kept them all. Silly me. I mean, I did have a lot of CDs. I've given away boxes and boxes of them, but I still kept all my favorites, and they've been sitting in boxes for years. So I'm going to display them again and get a CD player and bring that back into the fold, because it seems like it's coming back, and I have missed CDs. Like, streaming's good, and it's getting better and better. I bought a ridiculously expensive set of Bluetooth headphones that I stream on now, and streaming sounds great in my car as well. It's definitely getting better, but there's something about going back, speaking of this nostalgic kind of period, going back to putting on a CD through a 90s like Japanese CD player through a good hi-fi system. It sounds incredible. When music started to be digitally released and they broke away from tape machines and things like that, you couldn't really beat that sound. And now, it's a bit of a gimmick with a lot of records being re-released on vinyl from that period. They're still digitally sourced if they weren't tracked originally to tape. So to me, they don't sound as good, and that's part of the reason probably why CDs are having a bit of a comeback. But not even with teenagers. I think, CDs are just having a comeback purely because of the physical medium, and I was walking through Newtown here in Sydney last weekend, and I visited about 6 or 7 music shops. I was so surprised to see how much of the shops have changed in the last year. And more than 50% of the physical storefront now is stocking CDs, like Hum Records in King Street. A lot of these shops are bringing back CD on a massive scale. So the record labels must be doing it too. They're a lot cheaper to buy secondhand than vinyl is now. Vinyl has just skyrocketed and gone crazy. So yeah, nostalgia, it's interesting. I talked a little bit about fashion, music. There was a TV show I watched recently called The Last King of King's Cross based in Sydney, Australia, in King's Cross and Oxford Street in Darlinghurst in the early 2000s. And to me, I was hanging out in that scene as a young person in my late teens, early 20s, in the club scene. And so it was cool to see all that recreated on the show. And to think about that as being nostalgic now is kind of makes me feel old. But I think bringing back physical medium though, and having this kind of love affair with the early 2000s is a cool thing. It was a great period, and life now has just become so busy, and everyone is so reliant on their iPhone. And I think going back to just a period of time before technology kind of took over our lives is good to reflect on. And I bring this up with my younger students, like even in primary school, you know, and talk to like Gen Alpha, that were born in 2010 to 2024 this year. That generation have been born purely into technology. They haven't lived a life without technology, like the iPhone, the smartphone, computers. Interesting for that generation. And, you know, I talk to them about when I was traveling the world, like in 2006, before the iPhone. They're like, without a smartphone. They're like, what? How'd you do that? It's like you talk to people. And some of the basic things in life are important to go back to and reflect on, like communication skills and things like that. And you need that as a musician as well. So I'm all for it. I say bring back the CDs. I'm going to pull out all of my CDs from my collection, and I still probably have, 1,000 CDs that I've stupidly kept onto. I mean, some of them are kind of beaten up. I didn't look after my CDs as a teenager as well as I could have, so they get scratched, they get beat up. I don't even know what that is. Debussy. I've just got so many different types of CDs. Let's have a look at this box here real quick. I'm just randomly pulling some out. So, Human Nature. It says a lot about me as a teenager, doesn't it? They were great. Human Nature were great. Van Morrison. Echoes. Pink Floyd. That was probably my mum's. What else we got here? Johnny Farnham. Anthology. You know, I've got some old John Farnham records, but like an anthology just with all the hits, it's like that's what CDs are great for. Roachford, this was one of my favorite CDs as a teenager. This came out in what year? 94. Only to Be With You. What a song, released on Sony. A lot of these records just weren't ever released on vinyl. And then I've got like random stuff like, Essential Bob Dylan. I mean, I like listening to that era of music, Bob Dylan and things on vinyl still. But there's a lot of like classic CDs. Road Tested, Bonnie Raitt. There's some U2, All That You Can't Leave Behind. There's some things on here that are just like great. And just some friends and artists I've worked with, that Lynn Botel, you know, there's, oh look, she signed it. Luke, love your work. Boy, that's a flashback. Where's that? 2012? Yeah, there's just some cool stuff here. I mean, there's a bit of junk. I probably might throw out a bunch of these, but it'd be good to go through them. Oh, these were cool too when they would release. They're a lot cheaper than like buying a lot of vinyl these days. Like these sets were really cool that I collected a lot of. These like 5 classic albums, like Buddy Rich, 5 records. And to have them all beautifully kept on CD in one spot is great. It's really hard to find these on vinyl now. So, that's cool. Anyway, it's all fun and games. Look at that. Michael Jackson single. You Are Not Alone. pretty cool. Looking back now, though, at like the early 2000s and reflecting on it like years and years later, it was a great era to be starting out as a musician and discovering all of this amazing music. And I don't take it for granted because that music has stood the test of time. You know, I would go to like these record fairs, excuse my budgies, they like joining in the conversation. I'd go to these record fairs in Darling Harbour and sitting in these like massive auditorium spaces. I think they were like kind of where the ICC is now. And they'd have these record fairs where there'd be like just thousands and thousands of CDs, all under $10. And it would be like overstock that labels had to get rid of. And so I discovered so much music through those fairs, and that's how I built my record collection. Like I remember discovering Rufus Wainwright through that record fair, and found this record first and was like, oh, that's a cool cover. And then, you know, you'd open the liner notes and be like, oh, wow, Ethan Johns, cool. That's Glenn Johns' son. You know, I know him from, you know, other records. And then so I'd buy it, and then it's become one of my favorite records. And interesting enough, Lenny Warenka co-produced or executive producer of this. So I guess it's his son, I don't know, who played drums on the Gavin DeGraw. I did know all this nerdy stuff once upon a time. I'll have to do a bit of research. If you know, let me know. And then, you know, from Posers, I'd get into Rufus's first record, and then find out that my favorite drummer is on that record, Jim Keltner, and, you know, Van Dyke Parks produced it. And just the joys of like discovering these things through physical medium. It's a cool thing, you know. And now with streaming and things, you don't get all that information. For people that love that stuff, especially musicians, you know, finding out, you know, who played on the album and looking at the liner notes and seeing the lyrics, and that's a cool thing. And even though, you know, you can still do that on CDs, like it still has all that information. Oh, I lie. On some, it doesn't compared to vinyl, but, you know, some of them do. And I think that's another reason why the nostalgic, you know, buying physical medium is coming back. People want more than what they're given with streaming. It's like, you know, you pay for a streaming service, and then, you know, all of a sudden the next month you can't find that album. You know, it's moved to another platform, or same with movies and things on streaming platforms. And I'm sure with movie buffs and things, you know, DVDs are still, and Blu-rays and stuff like that, that's still common for I've still got DVDs, and, you know, not as much as my music, but some of my favorites I own, just for that reason, where it's like it's been taken off the platform you pay for and you can't watch it. Whereas if you slip in your DVD, you can watch it anytime you want. Cheers.